The debt's not going up at 2% or 3%. The debt's going up 8, 9, 10% or more. The U.S. had a $1 trillion baseline budget deficit, $1 trillion per year deficit for fiscal 2020 pre-pandemic. The Congress threw $3 trillion of emergency aid on top of that. And I'm not even criticizing all those programs. I mean, the payroll protection plan loans, the extended unemployment benefits, the increased unemployment benefits. Imagine where we'd be if we hadn't done that. But that aside, debt is debt. They piled $3 trillion on top. Now, this is going to take the U.S. debt to GDP ratio up to 135%. It was 106% when Donald Trump was sworn in. It's close to 130% today. Because remember, you got two things going on. It's a debt to GDP. So debt's your numerator and GDP is your denominator, right? Well, what happened? Well, the denominator shrank. This got smaller and this got bigger. So what happens to the ratio? It blows up. So now it's 135%. If you get the laws of economics right, which is not easy because most economists don't, but if you get them right, it's really a reflection of human nature. I mean, what is an economy other than all the people in the economy starting businesses, buying, selling, traveling, providing goods and services, et cetera. So human nature doesn't change, or at least it hasn't changed much in the last 100,000 years. So the fundamental laws of economics don't change either, but circumstances change, facts change, and that's important. Now, to answer your question, Kerry, you're right. There is a school of thought, a growing one, an influential one, that the debt doesn't matter. It's like, well, wait a second. So what? So the debt to GDP ratio went to 135%, which it did. Who cares? Well, what's wrong with it? 180%. We got issues. We got problems. Print up the money and monetize the debt and spend it and keep going. What is the problem? This comes under the banner of something called modern monetary theory, MMT. It's flawed, it's wrong, but it's got its followers, and those followers are now in the White House because one of the things Joe Biden had to do to get elected was to make peace with the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. They take the view that if the Treasury didn't spend the money, how would anybody make any money? That's ridiculous, but that's what they say. They say, hey, when the Treasury spends money, what do? Well, they build aircraft. They have benefit programs. They have government contracts. They do whatever they do. But when the Treasury gives you the money, you take the money and you spend it on somebody else, goods and services, go out to dinner, have subcontractors, whatever it might be. That's the real source of money. They also take the Treasury and the Fed and they merge them. Now, that's not legally the case. The Treasury and the Fed are separate institutions. The Treasury is just part of the executive branch, and the Fed is an independent agency. And the Federal Reserve banks are actually privately owned. A lot of people know. Some people know that, some people don't. But the Federal Reserve banks are privately owned by banks in the districts, so Citibank, Bank of America, et cetera. So they're completely separate. But the theorists ignore that and say, no, the Treasury needs to spend money because that's how the economy grows, and the Fed can monetize the debt. So you spend the money you don't have, you borrow to cover it. You issue bonds to cover the borrowing. And if the market wants to buy the bonds, fine. But if not, the Fed can buy them and put them away on the balance sheet, wait 30 years and collect the money. What's the problem? Who cares about the debt to GDP ratio? It's kind of a statistical abstract, but why should that stand in the way of using money to solve our problems, which are free healthcare, free childcare, free tuition, forgiveness of student loans. That's a $1.6 trillion ticket, by the way. And look, everyday readers and investors, there's no reason they should know all this stuff. This is total inside baseball. You have to be a geek like me to kind of keep up with it, but it's all coming. But what that means is we're going to test the Rogoff-Reinhardt thesis. Now, let me just take a minute to explain that. Up to a certain debt to GDP ratio, there is a Keynesian multiplier greater than 1. So the classic example is the UK was in a depression before the rest of the world. They have been hit pretty hard before the Wall Street crash. People aren't spending, they're saving. It's the liquidity trap. So if you get money, you pay down debt. When you don't have any debt, you put it in the bank. Whatever you do, you don't spend it. You hoard cash. Or people were buying gold. They were accused of hoarding gold, etc. But what they weren't doing was spending. And there was a lack of aggregate demand, and the banks were not lending. So Keynes said, well, if everyday people won't do it, the government must. The government can borrow. The government can spend. And what they discovered was that if you borrow $1 and spend $1, you can get $1.50 of GDP. Now, there's a separate debate as to whether that's actually incremental or whether you're just pulling growth forward. But so what? Even if you are pulling growth forward, maybe that's what you need to do when you're in a liquidity trap. But there's a problem. He called it the general theory of employment, interest, and money. But it was actually a special theory. I think he had a little Einstein in me because of the general theory of relativity. But it's actually a special theory, which means it's a theory that works in a set of circumstances, a set of conditions. The conditions where it works are you're either in a recession or just coming out of one. You have excess capacity and labor and industrial capacity, and you have very little debt. In those circumstances, you can borrow $1, spend $1, and get more than $1 GDP. The problem is that extra GDP you get for the borrow and spend, it goes down as the debt to GDP ratio goes up. What Reinhardt and Rogoff discovered is that at 90%, you go through the looking glass. Your payoff is now less than $1. You borrow $1, you spend $1, and you only get 90 cents of GDP or 95 cents, et cetera. So now, not only are you not getting your dollar's worth for the borrowed dollar or something more, which you did at lower levels, you're getting less than $1. So now what's happening? You're borrowing $1, you're spending $1, you're not getting $1 of GDP, but you are getting $1 of debt, which means your debt to GDP ratio is going up and the 90% is getting worse. And I just mentioned the United States is at 135%. So here are your two competing schools. There's the Keynesian multiplier and creating aggregate demand with government debt, and the Reinhardt-Rogoff, more than a thesis, I would say powerful evidence that beyond 90%, it doesn't work. It goes under less than one, on the one hand. And my friend Stephanie Kelton and Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris and the modern monetary theorists who say, no, it's all good. How could you get growth if you didn't spend money through the government? These theories don't agree at all. We're going to find out which ones work. I'll give away the answer, which is that Reinhardt and Rogoff have it right. Keynes had it right up to a point. Reinhardt and Rogoff discovered that critical threshold, that whether you want to call it tipping point or phase transition, or which physicists call it or whatever. The modern monetary theorists think the opposite, and we're going to find out. But what it means if Reinhardt and Rogoff are right, and I'm right, and Keynes was right, the more you borrow, it's actually a headwind to growth. Now you get just as up to the threshold, you got more and more and more. Oh, sorry, at a low level, you got more, but then it went down. But it's like any diminishing marginal return. You know, the curve starts very steeply, you get a lot of payoff, then it flattens out, then it goes down, but it's still positive. But at some point, it goes below the zero line and your marginal return is negative. And that's where we are.